2 minutes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Neal, and I'm the city manager in Edina. I want to welcome you to tonight's Town Talks event. This year we have planned a series, or I guess this past year we've had a series of Town Talks planned looking at various topics around Edina, around our infrastructure, our policies of connected and sustainable development, and other things that are important to our city. I want to introduce some elected officials before we get started. Mayor Hovland is here. Councilmember Jackson, Councilmember Anderson. We have State Representative Edelson. We have State Senator Franzen. We have Councilmember Pierce. And Representative Fraser. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate that. Tonight's presentation is about public safety and crime in Edina. Our speaker tonight is Chief Todd Milburn, and he's going to talk about current crime trends and our department's response and some new initiatives and crime prevention tips. Chief Milburn is going to speak for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for some Q&A, and we will wrap up at 8 o'clock or whenever we exhaust our questions in the room and our questions coming to us by phone, whichever comes first. So let me introduce you now to our chief, Todd Milburn. Todd joined our city staff in August, so he hasn't been here very long. He came to us after nearly a 30-year law enforcement career in Brooklyn Park, where he most recently served as the department's deputy chief. He worked his way up from the position of community services officer beginning in 1992. Todd holds a bachelor's degree in organizational management and leadership from Concordia University in St. Paul. Please join me in welcoming Chief Todd Milburn.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate everyone coming out here again tonight. We have a Vikings game going on here, so we know that's an important thing here, and that may have taken some people away. But people are also watching this live online, too, so they're able to watch it that way. We had a really good conversation this morning, a lot of great questions here. So what we'll do here today is I'm going to walk you through some slides that we prepared to talk about some of the recent things that we've seen here in the City of Edina, some of the things that we've done, and some of the things that we're working on moving forward. But what we really found a lot of value were the questions that came forward this morning as well. So we look forward to that. We'll allow plenty of time for that, and we'll see what we come up with here on the questions and provide the answers that you're seeking here as well. So first, let's do a little background here and explain a little bit more about me and who I am and where I came from. Like Scott had said, I just recently joined the police department as the chief of police here. I came from Brooklyn Park. I'm a St. Paul native. I grew up in St. Paul as a little kid, so I've been kind of moving my way around the metro area here, so I'm very familiar with the metro area. And after high school, I joined the Brooklyn Park Police Department as a community service officer, and then I was fortunate enough to stay there and become a police officer. Finished off my school, held a variety of different positions to include everything from patrol, undercover narcotics investigations, investigative work, you name it. Then eventually I worked my way up and was promoted into a variety of different supervisory positions. I was deputy chief for the last several years prior to taking this position, so I had a lot of great experience working in that community, in that city, in that police department. So that's a little bit about me and my background. And a little bit more about what we're going to talk about tonight. So I'll just give you a quick overview of our organization here, some of the current crime trends that we've seen, our response to that, Some of the recent big profile events, our carjacking case here that we've talked about here quite a bit. I have some updates for you on that end. And then we launched a couple of new initiatives in response to what we've been seeing, so we'll talk briefly about that. Give some more crime prevention tips that came out of the Q&A as well, so we'll talk more and expand upon that as the night unfolds. We get a lot of questions, or have had a lot of questions here over the last couple of weeks about our organization, just the number of officers and sworn staff. So real brief, we break off into 3 different divisions. We have our investigative division, our patrol division, and our administrative division. And so we currently have 55 sworn officers. Our sworn authorized strength is 57. We are down 2. We're going to be down 3. We're losing one of our talented members. He's going to become the chief of police at a nearby community, so that's great for him. So that'll bring us down to 3 sworn that we need to replace, and we'll talk about, we're going to launch a new marketing campaign for that, but we'll talk about that in a sec. We generally work 12-hour shifts, and so that's pretty typical for law enforcement agencies across the metro area. Our support staff has a breakdown there of the different positions that we have. Important and key for our organization is we have our own dispatch center here, located next door, and we have 10 911 dispatchers, that staff that work for us. 7 record staff, 6 community service officers, 1 crime analyst, and that's an important function for us. A lot of departments here nearby offer up and kind of work through a robust crime analyst driven organization, and so that's what our employee does behind the scenes. We do a lot of stat analysis and a lot of data-driven policing. So when we have patterns and things that take off, we're able to quickly organize that information and relay it back out to our officers and get our officers in the right spots. So that's an important function for our work. And of course, we have 1 administrative assistant. Call data. This just gives you a snapshot going back the last 5 years on overall crime, and these are actually overall crimes, 911 calls, proactive work, you name it, it's all encompassed in each of these different categories or each of these breakout years. So as you notice, in 2017, we were at over 71,000 incidents, and that's dropped significantly. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of the big reasons that we talk about is COVID. And so when COVID happened, a lot of 911 response or calls have started to drop down. A lot of the proactive work started to drop down, and so that's one of the main reasons why you see this trend dropping. With overall crime, and this is common for many communities, you see this decline that has happened, but also in certain key categories you see an uptick or an increase. And for us here in Edina, our biggest increases as of late have been theft from auto, burglaries, and vehicle thefts, not violent crimes. We've stayed about the same over the last 5 years. Crime reporting, and how do we report out on crime? And so one of the current strategies that we use is we offer up a crime map. And so if you look at the website cityprotect.com, you can just easily go to that website. You can see updated crime stats on a map, and you can select what you want to see and how you want to look at and sort out that data. That pulls directly from our CAD system or our records management system, so it automatically populates that. So you get very timely information. We get a lot of questions about crime stats and information that residents can obtain, and that's one way that you can do that. We also provide weekly crime reports, and that goes out to our publishes out through edinamn.gov/police. And we also send reports out to our local media members who also report that information out as well. We heavily use an extensive social media campaign. So if we have major events, big ticket things that happen, we also provide updates through our social media channels, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, things like that, through our city publications and networks. And we also use that information to request the assistance from the public, and we have a recent example here that I'll share with you. Talking about our recent crime trends, the things that have been kind of percolating for us in the last 3 weeks here. If we go back to November 12th, when we started to see some upticks in crime, these 3 areas are the areas of concern, or were the areas of concern for us. We saw in the last couple of weeks 9 vehicle thefts, 12 burglaries, and then, of course, the big high-profile event, the carjacking incident that occurred recently. Key in the end is if you look at burglaries, when we have auto thefts, what we've seen is we've had cars taken from garages. And so when a car is inside a garage or if the home is occupied, that's considered a first-degree burglary. So the burglaries go up a little bit, but some of those are auto thefts that are within that crime stat. So those have been on the uptick, and then we also have had a lot of questions about time of day, day of week, things like that. And so our patterns that have emerged have been centered around Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, typically in the afternoon and into the evening hours as well. So what have we done about it? So if you look at this map here, we've outlined 2 red areas that are boxed. And if you look on the west side of town or the left side, on the screen, that was the area that we started to first see some patterns emerge in areas of concern. And those were two. I know one for sure was a burglary involving a vehicle that was inside a garage, and the other one I believe was also a burglary. I'm not sure if the car was in that garage or not. But that started up for us, and we started to deploy some resources into that neighborhood. And then our next pattern emerged shortly thereafter in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and that's where we saw a little bit larger pattern expand with auto thefts and burglaries in that area as well. So what did we do? We started to deploy resources into those neighborhoods. We started to get officers out there as soon as we could to get more of a robust presence in those areas. So as part of our response, we started to see this evolve, and we're rightfully so had a lot of concerned residents. We started to push information out through our website, through our social media campaign, through email, text blasts. We started to push this information out to alert residents that we started to have this pattern in these areas of concern. Our patrol response, we beefed that up. We directed what we call directed patrols, so that basically is information that we tell our officers and strategically put them in locations, and so that was directed patrol focus for our officers. We also increased the number of officers in the residential areas, and so redeploying and putting more officers gets that higher and better presence. And then we also diverted our traffic unit. So Edina has been well known for having a robust traffic enforcement unit or division. We've had to scale that way down, and we redeployed those resources back into the neighborhoods as well, as that became a much bigger priority for us. We brought in officers in, a lot of officers in on a lot of hours of overtime. We had over 200 hours posted for officers to come in and help out with this work. And we also brought in reserve officers as well. So we used our reserve officers who volunteer their time. They came in as just more of an extra presence and more resources out in the field. That on average gave us about, I'd say, 6 to 10 extra officers out in different areas at any given time to help kind of beef up our presence in these impacted neighborhoods. We also deployed, you may have seen if you've been over in the 50th and France area, our mobile pro trailer, and that basically is a trailer that's a security trailer, has a lot of technology, a lot of gadgets, a lot of cool things on it. That also provides cameras and surveillance opportunities, but also a nice presence out there as well. So that's been deployed, and that will remain out there for the foreseeable future. That also gives us live feeds into video if we need it to, so it's a good resource for that. We've also been conducting a number of proactive traffic stops. When we talked about those extra officers on the street, we also conducted proactive traffic stops on suspicious vehicles, and we had a few. We had some cars coming into town that were occupied, and a few stolen vehicles and things like that that we were able to come across and take care of as well. Big for us, and this is not new, but we also put together a collaborative effort with our nearby agencies. We're not the only community that's seen an uptick in crime. We've had other suburban agencies nearby experiencing similar things. And so we started to conduct and put together weekly meetings by sharing information, intelligence, utilizing CISA, which is the Hennepin County kind of function of their intelligence sharing analysis unit, and getting everyone in the same room to have the same conversations to figure out where our trends and patterns are occurring. And so we put that together. That also allows us to understand where to deploy our patrol resources, if not here, maybe at a nearby community, and share our resources accordingly. And so that's off and running, and that will continue on as well. An update on the big carjacking case that we've been talking about. As you know, we had that incident occur at Lunds and Byerly's here at 50th and France back on the 9th. St. Louis Park also experienced a similar crime at their Lunds and Byerly's on the same day, about 3 hours prior to that. During the investigation, we had a lot of officers behind the scenes working on this, and we were able to develop out suspects with the help of some community members that have come forward on it as well. And I'm happy to report that we've made 2 arrests in that case, and we also have a 3rd person that was charged today. That news just came out as well. So we're still searching for that person, and I'm confident that we'll be able to find and apprehend that person as well. So that case was also a combined effort with St. Louis Park, and we believe today that those same suspects were involved in that case as well. So that's good news. We've also offered a $5,000 reward through the Edina Crime Prevention Fund. St. Louis Park also did something similar, so there was a $10,000 reward out there, and that still stands if we get help to help track down a 3rd suspect in that case. The county attorney has stepped forward and has been participating in some of the meetings that we've had, and they've also dedicated a special group of specialized prosecutors, both in the adult and the juvenile side, to offer up their expertise in these serious crimes that we're starting to see an uptick in. So they've started that new unit, and they've also offered up more victim advocacy as well to help out with victims of these types of cases, and so they're putting that information forward and helping out in that effort. So new initiatives, when we started to talk about or started to see that pattern evolve for us here in Edina, we put together a new initiative called Auto Theft Prevention, a video series. So a number of tips that came out by video that we pushed out to the residents. One of the biggest things that we saw was really in these patterns were crimes of opportunity. So we saw suspects driving through neighborhoods looking for garage doors that were open at homes and really just walking into these open garage doors to try and find an easy target, a car and where a lot of commonalities were in existence. People would leave their fobs inside the car unlocked, and it's really easy for someone just to walk in these days and just turn on the button, and if it runs, they're off and running. So we try to put together this campaign, a catchy phrase, a slogan, get our detectives on this to talk about what we're seeing and get the messaging out to community members to say, please lock your doors, please close your garage doors. It's as simple as that. That'll go a long way to help us out. And we also came up with a catchy tune. We have a very talented communications unit here, and they put together a great phrase and catchy tune around this to launch this initiative and this marketing campaign to talk about really the prevention side of things. And so we've pushed this video out in a number of different capacities. We have a video production segment that we call Beyond the Badge. And so we featured this information as part of that. Our mayor also has a feature that is called the Mayor's Minute, and he also pushed out information through that. And then our public service announcements that we had 4 of them, and so we continue to push out this messaging to our residents. Social media posts, of course, we push that information out through those outlets. And then our mayor penned a letter as well to residents to talk about some of the recent things that we're experiencing, so that went out. And Edina newsletters were paramount for us to get information out. Key on the bottom there, we talk about the reminder cards for patrol officers to distribute. As part of that work of having extra officers in the neighborhood, we also armed them with information. And so when officers were driving through the neighborhoods and perhaps saw a garage door that was open, would go up to the home and knock on the door and talk to the residents and say, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish here. Your garage door is open. Would you please shut it? So we had a lot of good feedback, too, from residents that would say, yeah, I was that person, right? And we were able to help that out. We also, as part of the Lock Around the Clock campaign, came up with a catchy acronym, which is called TIME, and it was just kind of an easy way for people to remember and think about things, and that just breaks down into, for T, take your keys with you. For the I, in your car, don't leave valuables visible. For the M, make sure you lock all windows and doors. And for the E, even when you're home, close your garage doors. And so just a nice, catchy way to think about it and just remember these crime prevention tips. Safe Cam program. So we'd actually been starting conversations internally about launching this initiative, and when we had the recent conversations, the community meetings, and the uptick in crime, we thought, let's execute on this and get this going out to the community because it's a really good program and we think it'll help us out. So basically, in a nutshell, what it does is it provides an opportunity for residents, business owners to give us information that at their homes or businesses, if they have security camera systems that could be of value for us, they can give us their information about where they're located. And we just create a database. It's a pointer system, and so if we have an event in a residential neighborhood, for example, and we want to go back into our database and see, hey, how many cameras are in this neighborhood to help us out on the investigative side, it's a great resource for us to quickly find and identify if we have extra help out there in security cameras that we can leverage for criminal investigation. So we launched this at our last community meeting last week. We published this information. When you're done tonight, you can walk out with this if you want a handout. If you're tech savvy, you can just scan the code here and bring it back with you. And you can easily sign up for this service. You can also opt out. To be clear, it's not a system where we have active live feeds into your camera system. It's just a pointer system. So you're just telling us that you have an address, that you have a camera on site, and that's as much as we have information available to us. And so that's it. Happy to report that in response to our last meeting that we had, I believe, over 90 people sign up already for it. So it's already taken off nicely, and we hope to expand that. Crime prevention tips, we've talked about this, so I'm just going to echo it here for the purpose of our audience and those that might be listening online. Real simple. All we're asking for people to do here is to take your vehicle's keys, do not leave them in or on your vehicle in a spare key holder. Do not leave your car running while unattended. Close and lock all windows and doors when you park. Park in well-lit areas when possible. Never leave valuables in your vehicle, especially if they can be seen from outside the vehicle. And please, please, please close your garage doors even when you are home. I don't want to go back to that because I want to say it's 100%, but I'm just going to keep it safe and say 99% of our vehicle thefts as of late have really just involved people leaving fobs inside their cars in this crime of opportunity or keys in it. It's as simple as that. And earlier today we talked about, for those of us a little bit older, you might think back on car theft as the traditional cracking the steering column and, putting wires together, things like that. That's not what we're seeing. It's just an easy opportunity for people that leave their fobs in the car and people are coming by and just pressing the buttons in the electric start or the start features, and they are off and running. And that's it. It's very easy. Okay, so that will conclude the formal presentation. I will turn it over to Scott. We have some follow-up comments here, and then we'll get into the Q&As.
Thank you. So we have an audience that's watching this as we're streaming, and I think also listening to it online. So if you're watching from home, you can call 1-800-374-0221 with conference ID 709-8578. Press star 1 on your telephone keypad when you're ready to ask a question. An operator will mute your line and place you into the queue until it is your time to speak. And when it is your turn, Communications Director Jennifer Benarott will introduce you. Before we start taking comments from our listeners, we like to ask our audience here if you have any questions. So we'll start with trying to exhaust all the questions in the room first, and then we'll go to folks who are online. So Jennifer will bring around the microphone. Who would like to begin?
What you catch someone, what happens to them?
Sure. So the question is, what happens to someone if we arrest them for a
Yes.
crime? And
Yes.
kind of explaining the process.
Well, I mean, are they on loose right away?
Sure, and it depends on the case at hand. So there's different severities of crimes. Misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor, felonies. Let's focus in on the felonies. So if we have a felony, say auto theft, for example, and we make an arrest and that person's held in custody for a period of time, it depends on any prior history, the complexities of the case. If it's just an auto theft or there's some more to it, that'll kind of dictate the length of time a person remains in custody. But ultimately, it goes to get them in front of a judge. And so sometimes they can bail out. Sometimes it's simple as an arrest and release until they get into court to make their appearance before a judge. Or if it's serious enough that they'll be held in custody for an initial appearance and they won't be released until they get in front of a judge. That's a real quick, high level, kind of quick, path of what happens. We can arrest and hold people here for a short period of time, but eventually people go downtown to the Hennepin County Jail facility, and that's where they'll be held for longer lengths of time.
Does an age make a difference?
We have differences with adults and juveniles. There's two different systems that work together, kind of similar, but also differently. So there's no bail for juveniles, per se. I mean, that's a different process. And for adults, you are entitled to bail if bail is put into place. And so there's two different ways to look at it.
Thank you for coming to speak with us, Chief. My question to you is, of the 22 carjackings vehicle, can you give us a breakdown of the profile and the racial makeup of those people and perhaps their age group to give us an understanding of who is committing this crime? Because last week at the meeting, the loudest voice was shouting, and I could only make sense that it's because we have the black and brown faces that were featured at the carjacking. And that, for me, is very concerning, personally, and anyone who lives in this community who's black or brown.
Sure. And of the 20 carjackings, are you talking about in Minneapolis, other nearby cities?
The ones you cited in the stats, we have 9 vehicles,
Okay.
12 residential, 1 carjacking. Who is this? Because you must have the data on who those
Sure.
perpetrators are.
Yeah. So to be clear, 1 carjacking here in Edina, auto thefts 9, I think it was 12 for burglaries, right? We don't have those cases solved, those other cases, so I don't have race data on that. I can only speak to what we have here right now in front of us. When we talk about the carjacking, the suspects in that case were African American. The other suspects in those involved cases, we don't have that done yet or concluded, so I wouldn't be able to share that information with you. When we talk about patterns of what we're seeing here, and this is a big conversation point, a lot of key things that are driving what we think are a lot of the crimes are auto thefts. Right? And auto theft seem to be kind of the impetus for other types of crimes that we're seeing here, really evolving across the metro area. So we're seeing typically, I would say 15 years old on up to 17, 18-year-olds. That seems to be the age range of where we're seeing the most offenders. And we're having an unfortunate problem right now with repeat offenders that are coming through the system here as well. And so multiple different cases that we're seeing the same people commit the same types of crimes. And oftentimes, in my experience, I've been doing this for a while, Typically what we see patterns is like smaller groups or cells or groups of people conducting these infractions. And so if you can go in and kind of figure out who they are, you usually have success in knocking that down. That's about the best I can give you right now for information on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief, for your presentation, for the work that you're doing. Really good news about working on closing these cases, so I think we're all grateful for that. My question is, you mentioned that you were increasing stops of suspicious vehicles. And my question is, what's the standard for what a suspicious vehicle is, and is that written down anywhere?
Written down for us here as a policy? No, we
Yes.
don't have it written down as a policy per se that way. But the standard is it's based on behavior and what suspicious activity might be occurring in a neighborhood, right? And it varies and it differs. So if we have, say, a residential neighborhood and we have a vehicle that's traveling through, what we've been seeing a lot of lately is our stolen vehicles. Already stolen vehicles and people entering into neighborhoods in those stolen vehicles. So for example, we have technology in place, license plate reader technology, and that can alert out on a stolen vehicle. So that might be an example, right? Or if we've told residents that if you live in a neighborhood and you are familiar with your neighbors, you know who should be coming and going, and that's just fine. If you see a vehicle that doesn't fit, for example, or if you see people maybe jumping out, like another good example might be Amazon deliveries. You know, you might see people jumping out of cars and going up to doors, and you know that's a pretty common tactic. So if you're seeing things like that happen, that's the time to call 911. Now on the backside of that, we're trained up to talk to people. Not everything is clear cut. Mistakes happen too. And so we're trained to have conversations with people if we get called to a scene, to have the right dialogue and make sure that, are we dealing with a crime? Are we dealing with something different? Are we dealing with a misconception? And that's what we do. And that's pretty common too. It happens quite a bit. So really a lot of it is getting into more of the evidence base or the things that are happening that are fact for residents to observe and report that out to us as well.
Are you doing anything to make sure that the definition of what's suspicious doesn't have anything to do with the fact that vehicles are maybe not as expensive as other vehicles, or the people inside them don't look like what the people in the neighborhood think they ought to be looking like? How do you assure that that's not part of the definition that people are using for suspicious?
Yeah, sure. So training, right? Honestly, training, that's what we do behind the scenes. And so we have these conversations quite often. It's rooted in case law. It's rooted in state statute. For officers, we have to act on reasonable suspicion or probable cause as well. We just can't operate off loose information. So you have to do due diligence to make sure you have your facts in place before you execute on that as well. So there's been extensive training over the years that got into that very topic. And then we have those dialogues as well. We're not just, you know, the extension of 911 callers. I would even take it a step further to talk about our dispatchers as well. And they are also well trained to fact find and make sure that when somebody calls 911, drill down on those facts and what it is that you're calling about so that that can be accurately relayed to our officers as well and get the right information out. And if something's off and it doesn't match up, our dispatchers also have that conversation with the caller and make sure we have our facts in front of us.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Chief. My question was, I noticed in the St. Louis Park video of the carjacking that the person was being physically assaulted in the car, the victim, and then obviously the lady who was punched in the face, and I believe in the Edina carjacking. Now, if those criminals or the assaulters, if they're 15, 16, 17, does the fact they're using violent force, does that play into how they're going to be handled once they're arrested by the judge or the prosecutors? And do they try and keep violent people off the street? Do we make a bigger effort to protect the citizens by keeping, because maybe they're 15, 16, 17, but if they're using violence and physical violence at that point, are we extra serious with making sure that that threat to the community is alleviated? Thank you.
Sure, good question. The question is essentially, right, things that are above and beyond the basic levels of a crime, so aggravating factors, or if you add assault into it, or robbery, and more serious violent types of crimes, do those kind of change the direction of a case, right? Keep the community safe, making sure suspects or offenders are held accountable. And yeah, that absolutely has an impact on that. I can speak from my perspective from the police department. Our job is to put together a case that's very strong and sound and leads into successful prosecution and conviction, right? And so we do everything that we can to build out a successful case through evidence gathering, witness statements, video, body camera, everything that we have available to us from a technology standpoint is important, and that's wrapped into the case, because that's what we're after as well, is to make sure that we have a very good, robust investigation to hand off to the county attorney or city attorney. But the different levels of crime already within state statute will dictate those end results as well, depending on the severity of the crime that we're dealing with.
Hi, Roberta Castellano, 4854 France Avenue South, and I'm, right on the border with Minneapolis, and so I'm like totally East Edina, and I know that the city leaders heard a lot from Country Club last week about what kind of community that they want, and well, a couple of comments. One, certainly the violent crime that we've had and with the carjacking and the auto theft, are really heighten the concern very quickly. But we had problems earlier this year. It didn't just start at the year end. And so it was actually the busiest year that I'm aware of in our area. And I'm concerned, I think all our city leaders know, I'm concerned about development, and I think a lot of people are, about where we're going as a community. And we haven't really been able to fully have an honest conversation about that because we haven't been finding out information. The city hasn't been disclosing things fully to us. They haven't been forthcoming. There's been false information. There's been withholding of information. And we need to have that honest discussion about where we're going. Where does our community want us to go? I think the city leaders, some of them, I kind of focus, well, actually I focus on Mayor Hovland, whom I actually have a lot of respect for. But with regard to the planning function, I think there's a lot of issues. And personally, and I think a lot of people would say the same thing, we don't really want to be an urban core community. And so I'm kind of looking at this whole crime thing as a kind of with the long view, And so it's really more of a comment, I think, at this point, rather than asking something from you. And I just want to say thank you very much for your presentation. Welcome to our community. Appreciate everything that you've done. I've been watching the crime map. It looks like it's a little quieter the last few days, so I'm happy for that. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just comment on a couple of things you brought up. And so, it's the upticks in crime are not unique to here. We're seeing it across Hennepin County. I come from Brooklyn Park, and the challenges in Brooklyn Park that we're experiencing were more in line with violent crime, unfortunately. Different than here. We're dealing with more property crime, burglaries, and then this, obviously this major carjacking incident. So it does vary around the county. Different things are happening. But I think we can all agree that there's concerns around these upticks in crime, right? And so we've had conversations that are going to go back to our partnerships with our nearby law enforcement agencies at different levels of government, county, state, local, and including Minneapolis. I've had conversations with leadership over there in the 5th precinct to talk about making sure that we're united and able to adapt to and deal with the challenges that are inevitably ahead. Crime patterns do tend to go up and down, and so that's the hope, right? We'll keep putting in the hard work, and we keep talking about leveraging our community and working in partnership, because we've said this multiple times too, there's not enough police out there to stick on every corner or block of the neighborhood and expect to see results. We have to really unite together and work through this in a collaborative effort to make sure that we're having those kinds of successes. And it's been proven to work in the past, and it'll work again in the future. We just kind of gets back to making sure that we're transparent in our information and getting timely information out, and how can we react to that to make it a better place moving forward too. So I do want people to have confidence and assurance that law enforcement agencies are talking behind the scenes. We always have been, and we always will, putting plans together and making sure that we're adapting to these changing times, and that work's going to continue on. We have very good relationships with our law enforcement partners here around the region. Thank you for
Jennifer,
your
do you want to
comments.
check phones? See if we have callers?
And excuse me, we have Angela Rehart who wants to ask a question.
Angela,
Your
you can
line's
go
now
ahead when
open.
you're ready.
Okay, hi. Pro Edina PD here. Thank you so much, Edina PD. Great job. Question, well, first of all, statement. I would request Edina PD do not overreact and create a Dante Wright situation. Secondly, my question is about Minneapolis. I'm understanding that the mayor in Minneapolis is now taking crime much more seriously now that Edina's, talking a lot about it, and St. Louis Park and other cities. So my question is, do you feel we are influencing Minneapolis in a positive way in terms of public safety? And also, what kind of ongoing, either weekly, bi-weekly, like roundtables are you having with the mayor and the Minneapolis PD on crime? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm getting a little hard of hearing as I get a little bit older too, so it's just a little to hear all those comments. But I believe I understand the theme is: are we engaged with Minneapolis on crime trends and patterns, and do we think that we've had like some kind of influence on the politics of Minneapolis? And I can't speak to the political end of it, but I can speak to our engagement efforts and our work with Minneapolis Police. It goes back to my comments just prior to this call, that from an intelligence sharing standpoint, yes, we have been and will continue to beef that up to make sure that we're having timely communication about trends and patterns that are happening, and then be adapted to that and respond to that if the need is there. So that work has been in place and it'll continue. And I did reference earlier too about our collaborative effort with our nearby cities. We also have talked to Minneapolis from like an intelligence sharing standpoint to make sure that we're talking about the same things that we're seeing here across the region as well. So yes, that will continue, and we'll be working closely with Minneapolis.
I have no one else on the line right now.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Yes, we have a question in the room yet?
What can citizens of Edina do to support the police department?
One more time, please.
What can the citizens of Edina do to support the police department in their efforts?
Yeah, great question. What can residents do, business owners, you name it, do to support the police officers? Well, being that I'm new here, I can say that I truly am appreciative and feel super blessed, because this community is very, very strong and very passionate about their police department and the community engagement work and all the things that we're doing. And so you feel that when you come into this community, and it's a great thing to have. And I often tell people too that when you see officers, thank them for the work that they do, because it's challenging. We talked about this earlier today, that it's a very stressful environment for officers, and it has been for quite some time. And we're seeing that, because when we talk about recruitment efforts and retention and things like that, we're seeing some areas that are suffering now as a result of that. So it's important to continue to support the police department, not only here locally, but across the region, and show that support in ways that maybe it's just non-traditional, you haven't thought of. Also engage your policymakers and your council members and your elected officials too. I'm blessed here too, because we have a very good council that's very supportive, and it's not something we talked about yet, but I just throw it out there that this council has been very supportive of the work that we do, and has been very quick to react and say that if we need help in areas, that they're going to accommodate that and take on a leadership role in this work as well. So that's good. But for those of you that may not be in this community or nearby, I mean, I think that's an important thing, is to stay engaged in processes, hold people accountable, pay attention to the details, and you'll have success moving forward as well. So thank you for your comment. It is important that we continue to engage and also show the support for our officers, because it's a hard job and they do a great job out there.
Anyone else? Okay. Sure.
Next one.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for being here. Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to know if there's anything that specifically Edina is doing with juvenile carjackers or carjackings, and if there's any program set up, or is that outside, is that like Hennepin County's responsibility, or is there anything that the city is doing to engage them in a different way when, because I used to live in Brazil, Generally the people that assault people in Brazil are juveniles, and I'm not talking about 15-year-olds. I'm talking about 10-year-olds with guns. And if somebody's, corrupted at a young age, that takes a lot of work to undo. And it sounds like you said this is now a trend in our community, not just Edina, but the Twin Cities metro area. So is there anything that cities or is the county uniting to do something specifically, because you said they don't have bail, and if the ramifications might not come at home, what can we do? Are there any ideas? Are we talking as a community about this? I mean, I know some places are, but I'm just wondering, because you're talking to different agencies, if you're seeing, this being spoken about. Because from my experience in Brazil, this isn't going to be fixed at home. And if there's no bail and no consequences within the legal system here, because there are in Brazil, but here, if there isn't, I wonder. So, thank you.
No, that's a great point. And lately we've been talking pretty heavily about the enforcement side of things, right? But what we haven't talked about, because it's somewhat complicated, but it does kind of tie into a conversation that happened this morning, is like, well, what's causing all this? Why? Is anyone doing any kind of formal professional level studies on this? My response was, well, yes, but I'm not exactly sure who's doing that right now because it's pretty new. But like my experience, the COVID impact, I think, is like one of the reasons, right? So I think we have a lot of lost kids out there that are just kind of lost and just lack connectivity to resources that were in place pre-COVID, and it's having an impact right now too. We just have kids that are just kind of lost. They don't have good leadership, supervision, resource connections, those kinds of things. And then we flip it over to the police conversations. We put a lot of our stuff on hold because of COVID, right? So we talk about community engagement and how can we get into our youth and how can we show them kind of leadership attributes and get them connected in from our standpoint, because it's not just about enforcement, it's also the relationship building. And when we talk about, the interaction and relationship between police departments and communities, it's about building trust. And if you can build trust at a lower level, at a younger age, you start to see better results moving forward down the road. So that's very much a focus. And I could list off like already things that we're doing here in the Edina Police Department on community engagement efforts to those kinds of points. It's long and it's good. It's been going on for a long time, but we're going to continue to expand upon that because as I said when I walked into the door here, is that the way law enforcement looks and the way in which we provide police services over the last 5 years will change drastically over the next couple. It's going to look different. We're just kind of rewriting the script, right, and how what does success look like. So that work's going to continue. We're going to have to develop it out and be innovative in that, and how to kind of capture these kids and get them back into structures, resources, all those kinds of things. And so those conversations have been happening. We're going to probably reactivate a lot of those good programs as well as we move forward too. It's a great question. Thank you.
Janet? Well,
I'm going to ask one more question just to piggyback on what has been going on in the room. So for me, I'm truly just concerned with, it sounds like there's more targeting and everyone is dancing around the edges of who these allegedly criminals are and how we punish them. So for me, I'm just very concerned in the community hearing those voices, and it was very loud in the country club last week. I am concerned, how are you going to inform your officers not to just hyper zero in on the black and brown bodies in this community? I am scared because my children belong in this community. I do not want them to, just because they're walking around and they're brown, they should be picked up because we have high crime. And high crime based on what? I don't have last year's statistics to be able to use a benchmark and say, there's an increase here, and so everybody should be rounded up. How are you going to prevent that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's communities of color, right? And how we build trust in our communities of color, right? And as we know in Edina, our communities, the demographics are changing, right? at maybe a slower rate than other communities. I come from a very diverse community. In Brooklyn Park, for example, is over 50% diverse, and these are the conversations that we have, right? And so as we go into Edina here and things start to change from the diversity standpoint, is a good thing. But we have to be mindful of this as well. And so how do we deal with that? It goes back to the training conversation that we've had, we talked about as well. There are laws in place, but when we have these conversations about understanding the scope and purpose of what we're trying to do, that's what we talk about here to make sure that we're not overcommitting and kind of feeding into maybe what could be a political tact or kind of concern in the community and then taking it too far to one side. That's not what we're about, because it goes back to us being professionals, and we know how to react to situations and have a professional tact and approach on how we might encounter a situation. In law enforcement, again, I've been doing this for a long time. Every day is a different circumstance, right? And so what we're talking about today will be different tomorrow. And it's important for our officers, these are the conversations we have in the training, is that you have to remember you have to be adaptive to the changing times and be able to be flexible and understand what you're dealing with, right? Not everything's up here. Most things are down here in your response on priorities or severity of issues and things like that. But the best officers in the world are what I call kind of flex or utility position players in baseball, that you can change and adapt your structure and your approach to things on the fly depending on the circumstance that unfolds, because they can be very dynamic that way. I'm concerned about it too, because we've talked about it as well. And it concerns me that we don't want to make sure that we're overreacting, because we've done a lot of good work. More work needs to happen in this area for better results. And it goes back to me and my commitment to build trust in our communities of color as well. So we're watching it very closely. Yeah.
Just in a thought, I remember at the beginning of COVID, there was talk in Hennepin County or Minneapolis, maybe in some of the cities surrounding Minneapolis, they were going to release prisoners from jail. I'm sure I've heard maybe some of those were worse criminals than others. Is that data shared with the surrounding community police?
Could you just repeat which data you're referencing? The first part that I just missed.
Is the data on what kind of criminals are were released out of prison due to COVID reasons, and that they are now at large in the community, kind of like when a sex offender is released into a neighborhood, the neighbors are warned. Was that shared with Edina and Plymouth and New Hope? And if in fact, I don't know exactly how many rapists or, felony offenders were released, but there were releases, correct? So I'm just wondering if that was shared with all the police officers. And as far as the racial profiling, I mean, we all have access to the FBI crime statistics. Every race has access to the same data and statistics. And my experience is, and I think when you talk to most reasonable people of all colors, that they're not racial profiled. I mean, the kids that were that punched the woman, and the kids that the carjacking in St. Louis Park, it is what it is. If it keeps the community safer, I think the police, it's common sense for us to not racial profile, but I don't think that's a big concern. The stats are quite clear on who does most of who are the criminals, whether white or black. The police know who they are, the court system knows who they are. Maybe we need to keep better tabs on them and do a better job of not letting them back out on the street. Anyways, thank you.
I'll just finish off by saying we don't track and have stats on those that are released back into the community. That's on the Department of Corrections side, and there's a lot of different layers to data collection on that. We don't focus on that. We focus on the other side of things, the trust, the building relationships, the holding offenders accountable at the time that an event happens, and that's where most of our data is centered around as well, and that's what we have access to and track.
I think we want to move on now to sort of our final statements. And before we do that, I want to thank Chief Milburn again for hosting this and sharing your thoughts with us tonight. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
So at this time, I want to invite Representative Edelson and Senator Franzen to come up, and they can have some time here, and then we will ask our Mayor, Jim Hovland, to wrap up.
Hi, everybody. So this is our third meeting, and it's like you said, Janet, the first one was, we had a very angry community, and every community has a right to feel safe, so the anger, I get it. With regards to what Senator Franzen and I have been doing, we have, I can tell you I've made a ton of calls. I think I've just been on the phone for 3 weeks trying to figure out what we can do to address this, because to the question being asked, a lot of the juveniles across the board that we've been seeing, a rise in crime, it has been juveniles. And I do think there's a correlation to what the police chief has said to COVID. And so what can we do is a really good question. I want to thank Representative Frazier and Representative Winkler for being here. The reason I asked them to come is because both work on public safety. And really what we're trying to do is convene for the state. Edina is not an island of ourselves. We belong to a larger state, and so the bigger question is, what are we going to do about rising crime for the state of Minnesota? How do we partner with our schools? How do we holistically approach this so that we are not locking kids up forever? Because that's not really the solution, and I don't think victims would also say that that's what they want for a 12-year-old kid that committed a crime. So we want to definitely hold young people accountable that are committing these crimes, get them the help they need, and so together, the governor, I did speak with the governor's Commissioner Schnell today, and it sounds like we will have a statewide approach to this where we'll be calling in law enforcement, advocates, superintendents of school districts to really look holistically at what we can do. So I'm looking forward to that. And feel free to email me. I can leave some cards up front, but Heather Edelson, thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative Edelson, and I don't have much more to add. She did a great job. I just want to say that we are here as your elected representatives in the state level to hear you, to listen to you, to see you. I do agree. This is the third meeting I'm part of as well. We need to hear from our community. We need to be supportive of the people who are keeping us safe, and I have tremendous respect for our chief and for all the law enforcement officers that keep our communities safe anywhere in our state. As I mentioned this afternoon, my dad was a police officer in Puerto Rico. He left the force, and I grew up next to a sergeant, so I only knew he was a sergeant, and I have tremendous respect out of that experience, but also know that there's a lot of us who are doing so much work to keep our community safe. So it's not going to take one bill, one reform, one funding bill, but we are taking a holistic approach and looking at all the different levers that we can have at the state level to be supportive of our communities across the state, and we're here to be in partnership with the city and the surrounding communities of Edina, Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, which is the Senate district that I represent. So thank you for being here, and we are accessible. We'll keep sharing information as we have it, but certainly hear that there's a lot of anger and anxiety in our community, and we're going to get through this together as a community in partnership, and it's going to take each and every one of us. So I appreciate my colleagues from the House that are here to hear from all of you, and we'll keep this conversation going and be accessible to all of you. Thank you so much.
I have to say I like the approach that's being taken in the legislature. I was at a meeting of mayors a couple of weeks ago now down in Rochester, and mayors from across the state, the first topic of conversation was crime in their communities. Communities as small as a place like Waldorf out by Worthington, where they were catching drug dealers from Chicago out there selling meth in the middle of the night, and they've put up cameras all over their little main street to try to control criminal activity. So it's a problem that we need to deal with. We've had this experience in Edina that was very traumatic, but you think of the folks in the 5th Precinct, and we had one of the inspectors here a week ago when we had the meeting at Edina Country Club that the neighbors in the Country Club district called, and there were over 300 people there. It was standing room only, many people from Minneapolis. And one of the things I noticed was that it became a venue or a platform for people from other parts of the metro that had been victims to be able to express what had happened to them, because they needed it. They needed to be able to tell that story. It was cathartic for them, and I think that was really, really critical. And so one of the things that came out of that meeting was the commitment to work all the way through the criminal justice system. You know, we tended to think about it, I think, in terms of we've got to catch people that are doing things that are bad, and then you know, make sure that there's responsibility for those actions. But we hadn't really, at least I personally hadn't thought about much about the rest of the criminal justice system, but we heard folks from Minneapolis in particular being concerned about some of the things that were happening at Hennepin County. That led to a meeting on Friday of about 6 mayors out in Eden Prairie, our chiefs, and also our city managers to talk about next steps where we could continue to work together, collaborate and cooperate to try to deal with this problem. And it's a metro-wide problem. And as Representative Edelson said, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance, no matter where they live in Minnesota or anywhere else in the country, to live life the way it ought to be lived and not to be worried about how life is lived. And for every part of the metro, I think we need to be talking with other mayors, other representatives from the legislature, other county attorneys, people running for county attorney a year from now. So I'm appreciative of Representative Winkler being here. When we held that meeting last week at Edina Country Club, I got calls from Corcoran to Lake Elmo, Inver Grove Heights, to Columbia Heights, all across the metro. Mayors now will be meeting in early January to discuss this issue further. Today, I was able to talk to our county attorney, Mike Freeman, and we promised people at the meeting last week that we'd be trying to coordinate everything with other areas of law enforcement and also government. So Mike Freeman told me that he'd be at that meeting on January 10th of mayors. We've invited city managers to come from across the metro. We've invited chiefs of police to come. And that meeting will be held in Bloomington City Hall, 10 o'clock on January 10th. And then that'll be followed by a regular Regional Council of Mayors meeting. So that's the next step there. And then just this afternoon, I had a phone call with Mayor Fry. I had put a call into him earlier in the day. Thanks for that cell phone number, which I'm sure wasn't easy to get. And he called right back and said that he wanted to cooperate with all of us. We're just going to work together on this issue. And to the extent that there are a lot of younger kids involved in this, and they're going through a system that's not helping them, where you might have a 14, 15-year-old that's been arrested as many times as he is old. That's not right. Something's wrong there. We've got to help these kids. We want everybody to have every chance in life that they can have. And so we've got to help these kids as well as going about the task of making sure that our communities are really safe, that people and property in our communities are safe. And I think that's a universal quest, whether you're at the state level or the local level. So that's what we're continuing to do. The work goes on. I think the more we collaborate together, the more effective we'll be at not only dealing with the criminal aspects of this, but also dealing with the underlying root causes of it. And we'll get there too. So thanks everybody for coming this evening. Really appreciate you being here. And we'll see you down the road.